She didn't scream. She didn't fight back. She only cried, softly, quietly, on the cold kitchen floor. And her son stood there, close enough to hear her breathing, close enough to see the tears gathering at the corner of her eyes, close enough to say something. He said nothing. Her name was Mama Ifunanya. She was a Nigerian woman, dark-skinned, thin hands. A life shaped by patience and survival. She lived in her son's house now. Not because it was where she belonged, but because there was nowhere else left to go. Once, she had a home of her own, small, modest, held together by routine, dignity, and endurance. But time erases places like that. Walls disappear. People move on. And mothers, especially poor Nigerian mothers, learn how to shrink themselves without asking why. When Mama Ifunanya arrived, she did not complain. She unpacked slowly, carefully, as if every item she placed down was an apology for taking up space. She learned the rhythm of the house quickly, the hours when silence was safest, the corners where her presence attracted the least attention. She washed dishes without being asked, swept floors that were already clean, lowered her eyes when conversations passed over her, as if she were not meant to be part of them. She told herself it was temporary, that things would settle, that patience could restore harmony. Mama Ifunanya believed in one simple rule. If she stayed quiet, if she didn't complain, if she made herself small enough, peace would survive. She believed silence was protection, that by holding her tongue, she was protecting her son from conflict, from tension, from choosing sides. She believed love meant endurance. So she swallowed words that burned her throat. She nodded when she wanted to speak. She smiled when her chest felt tight. Every day, she chose quiet over truth. Every day, she told herself it was the right thing to do. She was wrong. The house was never loud. There were no shouts, no slammed doors, no voices raised high enough for neighbors to hear. From the outside, it looked peaceful, calm, well-mannered. But inside, something else lived there. Words. Small words. Sharp words, spoken softly, delivered daily. They came wrapped in politeness, in careful tones, often followed by a sigh or a pause, or a look that said more than the sentence ever could. Words like reminders, corrections, suggestions that were never really suggestions. Mama Ifunanya heard them while standing at the sink, her hands deep in soapy water, pretending the sound of running water was louder than the voice behind her. She heard them while folding laundry, smoothing wrinkles that never disappeared. She heard them while setting plates on the table, careful to place everything exactly where it was expected. Didn't I already show you how to do that? It would be easier if you just let me handle it. You don't have to help. It's better this way. Each sentence sounded calm, reasonable. Each one carried the same message. You are in the way. There was no anger. That was the clever part. No heat to react to. No explosion to justify a response. Just enough edge to make correction sound like kindness and dismissal sound like concern. Mama Ifunanya learned how to respond. A nod. A soft, okay. A step back. She told herself it was nothing. Different habits. Different generations. Different ways of doing things. But the words kept coming, daily, predictable, carefully aimed. They followed her through the house like a shadow, never touching her, never striking her directly, but always close enough to remind her she no longer belonged at the center of anything. And her son. Her son was always nearby, sometimes on the couch, scrolling through his phone, sometimes tying his shoes by the door, sometimes passing through the room just as another sentence landed. He heard everything and said nothing. That silence gave the words permission. His wife never raised her voice. She didn't need to. Didn't I tell you how to do this? The question was polite. Ask the way people ask when they already know the answer and want you to feel foolish for not knowing it too. Mama Ifunanya froze. Her hands hovered midair. She searched her memory. Had she folded the cloth wrong? Used the wrong sponge? Placed something a few inches off? Before she could speak, "It's not that hard." The sentence landed gently, like a hand on the shoulder, but pressed just enough to remind her who was in control. Then came the final one. "Please don't touch it. You'll just make it worse. Please," polite, almost kind. But what followed erased all softness. "You'll just make it worse. Not you might, not let me help, just a declaration of failure." Mama Efunanya stepped back. Not because she was told to, but because her body already knew when it was no longer welcome. Each sentence was calm, measured, helpful in appearance. And each one landed exactly where it was meant to. Not on her pride, not on her temper, but on the part of her that still hoped to be useful. She learned how to respond without responding. She nodded. She nodded again. She nodded always. Inside, something folded in on itself each time. She remembered when her hands were trusted, when they fed families, when no one stood behind her correcting the angle of her work. Here, every task felt like a test she kept failing. Sometimes she caught her reflection in the window, in the dark screen of a television. An older Nigerian woman, shoulders bent, eyes cautious, always waiting for the next sentence. Her son noticed, but not enough. He told himself it wasn't serious. "It's just words. I don't want to make things worse." He feared choosing sides, feared conflict, feared breaking the fragile balance he mistook for peace. So he stayed silent. At first, silence felt neutral, like standing in the middle. But neutrality has weight, and weight always falls somewhere. For him, silence felt like peace. For Mama Efunanya, it felt like confirmation. Confirmation that she was alone. That correction was allowed, that no one would interrupt. He didn't realize his silence wasn't empty. It was full. Full of permission. Full of decisions he didn't think he was making. By the time he understood, silence had already chosen its role. It was no longer a pause. It had become a position. And silence became his choice. Mama Efunanya stopped eating with them. At first, it happened quietly, so quietly no one noticed. She began taking her plate after everyone else had finished, waiting until the chairs were pushed back and the conversation had already moved on. Sometimes she ate standing in the kitchen. Sometimes she sat alone on a small stool, facing the wall, as if the room itself no longer expected her presence at the table. No one asked why. In many Nigerian homes, silence is often mistaken for respect. So her absence went unquestioned, folded neatly into the rhythm of the house like something that had always been that way. She started waking up earlier than everyone else, long before the sky fully lightened, long before the first sounds of the neighborhood motorcycles, vendors, distant radios rose from the street. She moved through the house carefully, barefoot, learning which floorboards creaked and which did not. She cleaned when no one was around, sweeping floors that would be dirtied again within hours, washing plates already washed the night before, wiping counters that did not need wiping, just to feel useful, just to justify her place in the space she now occupied. When the others woke up, the house looked orderly, quiet, as if it had arranged itself. Her work was meant to be invisible, and it was. Her voice grew softer. Not suddenly, not dramatically. It faded the way daylight does when clouds roll in, slowly, almost politely. She answered questions with fewer words. She stopped explaining herself. When spoken to, she replied just enough to be heard, but never enough to invite conversation. Her footsteps grew lighter. She learned how to move without sound, how to pass through rooms without drawing attention, how to open and close doors, as if apologizing for the disturbance. Even her breathing seemed to adjust, measured and careful, as though the air itself belonged to someone else. In Nigeria, elders are often loud by presence alone. Their authority once filled rooms without effort. But Mama Efunanya's presence began to shrink, day by day, until it barely registered. She noticed it herself. She noticed how people no longer paused when she entered a room, how conversations continued over her head, as if she were part of the furniture. How instructions were given without looking at her. How decisions were made around her without asking. So she adapted. She stopped interrupting. Stopped reacting. Stopped being seen. She learned how to disappear without ever leaving the room. Silence doesn't hurt at first. At first, it feels like relief. Like choosing calm over chaos. Like stepping back from a fire before it burns out of control. In many Nigerian homes, silence is praised. It is called maturity, wisdom, the ability to endure without complaint. Mama Efunanya believed that too. She believed silence meant strength, that if she endured quietly, things would eventually settle. That storms passed faster when you didn't challenge them. So she stayed still. She stayed quiet. She stayed where she was. And for a while, nothing happened. That was the danger. Silence doesn't strike like anger. It doesn't leave marks. It doesn't raise alarms. It works slowly, patiently, the way rust eats through metal from the inside unnoticed until something finally breaks. It hurts slowly. It hurts when days pass and no one asks how you're doing, when your absence is accepted without curiosity, when your voice becomes optional, then forgettable. In a house full of people who look like you, speak like you, share your blood and history, you begin to feel like a visitor who has overstayed her welcome. It hurts when you realize that your pain has become background noise. Mama Ifunanya learned this truth not in a single moment, but in fragments, in the way conversations continued without her, in the way her son's eyes slid past her when the room grew uncomfortable, in the way corrections came easily, but concern never followed. It hurts when you notice that even your tears fall quietly, so quietly that they don't interrupt anything. And then comes the realization that cuts deepest of all. It hurts when you understand that no one is watching closely enough to see you breaking, that the room will not pause, that no one will step in and say, "This is enough," and no one is coming to stop it. The kitchen was quiet. Too quiet. Not the kind of quiet that brings peace, but the kind that presses down on the chest and makes every breath feel louder than it should. The fan above barely hummed. Outside, the distant sounds of Lagos horns, voices, engines felt impossibly far away, as if the world had decided not to intrude on this moment. Mama Efunanya sat on the floor, not because she had fallen, not because she was weak. She sat because her body had reached a place her pride could no longer hold. Her back leaned lightly against the cabinet, her knees drawn in, her hands resting in her lap trembling despite her effort to keep them still. Tears slipped from her eyes, quiet and steady, landing on the cold tiles beneath her like something that had been waiting a long time to be released. The kitchen smelled faintly of soap and leftover heat from cooking. It was a familiar place. A place she had stood in for years, working silently, trying to make herself useful. And now, for the first time, she was sitting low, small, exposed. Her daughter-in-law had just walked away, not stormed out, not slammed the door. She had simply turned and left, her footsteps measured, her back straight, as if nothing important had happened at all. As if the words she had just spoken were ordinary, forgettable, already gone from her mind. Mama Ifunanya watched the space where she had been standing. Then she lowered her eyes. Her son stood there, right there, close enough to hear her breathe, close enough to hear the soft, uneven rhythm of her chest rising and falling, close enough to see the way her shoulders shook when she tried to steady herself. He didn't move. He didn't step forward. He didn't step back. He stood in that familiar place, the space between involvement and escape, where he had learned to remain whenever things became uncomfortable. His hands hung at his sides, his eyes fixed somewhere just above her head, as if looking directly at her would require something he didn't know how to give. Time stretched. Seconds passed. Then more. Mama Ifunanya felt the weight of his presence more than the pain of her tears. She had cried before alone, quietly, in places no one could see. But this was different. This time he was here. This time there was no excuse of absence, no way to pretend ignorance. She waited. Not because she expected him to speak, but because a part of her still hoped he might see. Finally, she lifted her head. Her voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. "My son." She said it the way she always had, with tenderness, with familiarity, with a lifetime folded into two simple words. Saying his name felt too heavy. "My son" was enough. She paused. The silence between them thickened, filled with everything she had never said. The nights she stayed awake, worrying. The mornings she woke up early so he wouldn't see how tired she was. The years she told herself that patience was love. "You don't need to defend me." Her voice did not shake when she said it. That was the surprising part. There was no accusation in her tone. No bitterness. Just a statement, gentle, resigned, honest. She paused again. This pause was longer. Her eyes met his then, directly, not pleading, not angry, just open. Just, "Look at me once." The words fell softly into the room, almost fragile. She did not ask him to choose sides. She did not ask him to argue, or shout, or correct anyone. She did not ask him to fight a battle she knew he was afraid to fight. She only asked for one thing: recognition. To be acknowledged as someone still standing in the room, someone whose pain existed, someone who mattered enough to be seen. That was all. She didn't ask him to choose. She didn't ask him to fight. She only asked to be seen. He opened his mouth. For a second, it looked like he might speak, like the words had finally caught up with him. His lips parted, breath drawn in as if something important was about to cross the space between them, something that could still change the shape of the moment. No words came out. They stalled somewhere behind his teeth, trapped by fear, by habit, by the weight of a decision he had been postponing for too long. His chest tightened. His mind raced, searching for something safe to say, something neutral, something small, something that wouldn't demand consequences. He found nothing. So he did the thing he had practiced all his life. He looked away. Not sharply, not dramatically. Just enough to avoid her eyes. Just enough to pretend the moment hadn't asked him for anything at all. His gaze landed on the counter, the wall, the floor, anywhere that wasn't his mother sitting there on the tiles waiting. In that brief movement, something irreversible happened. Silence, until now, had felt like absence, like emptiness, like nothing at all. He had told himself it meant staying out of trouble, staying calm, keeping the peace. He had believed silence was a pause, temporary, harmless, easily explained. But silence is never empty. It fills the space words refuse to occupy. It absorbs meaning. It carries decisions without announcing them. His silence landed on the room like a verdict. For Mama Ifunanya, the message was immediate and unmistakable. She didn't need him to say it aloud. She had lived long enough to understand what avoidance sounds like. She had raised a son in a country where people learned early how to read between lines, how to hear what was not being said. And what was not being said was everything. She saw it in the way his shoulders stayed still, in the way his feet did not move toward her, in the way the space between them remained untouched, unchallenged, preserved. She understood then, not with anger, not with surprise, but with a quiet finality, that this was the answer she had been waiting for. Not a defense, not an explanation, just distance. For him, the moment passed quickly, or so he thought. He told himself it would be fine, that things would settle. That silence had worked before, and it would work again. He didn't realize that silence, once chosen, leaves a mark. Because silence doesn't simply avoid conflict, it aligns with it. It leans, it settles. It declares where it stands without ever raising its voice. And in that moment, silence stopped being neutral. It chose a side. Mama Ifunanya began packing her things. There was no announcement, no dramatic pause, no final conversation meant to change anyone's mind. She waited until the house settled into its familiar rhythm, until voices lowered, doors closed, and the air returned to its usual quiet. Then she moved, the way she had learned to move over the years, carefully, respectfully, as if even leaving required permission, slowly, Quietly, she opened the small bag she had kept beneath her bed. It wasn't much, just a few worn dresses, a headscarf folded thin from years of use, sandals shaped perfectly to her feet. Each item carried a memory, but she did not linger on them. Memory was heavy, and she was tired of carrying weight. She folded each piece with care. Not neatly, deliberately, the way a woman folds when she knows this isn't temporary. When she knows she won't be coming back to unfold these clothes in the same place again. No arguments followed her movements. No questions floated down the hallway. No explanations were asked for or offered. That was how she knew the decision was final. She packed in silence, the same silence she had lived in. The same silence that had been mistaken for patience, for obedience, for acceptance. Now it wrapped around her hands as she worked, steady and cold. She did not cry. Tears belong to moments when someone might still stop you. She paused once, holding an old wrapper between her fingers, the kind Nigerian women keep for years. Soft from washing, reliable in a way newer things never are. She pressed it flat, smoothed the creases, then placed it carefully into the bag. Even now, she took care not to rush, because rushing would have meant panic, and panic would have meant doubt. She had none. When the bag was nearly full, she looked around the room. It was smaller than it used to be. Or maybe she was simply seeing it clearly for the first time, a place where her presence had been tolerated, but never anchored. Where she had stood quietly, waiting to be needed again. She closed the bag and tied it shut. The sound was soft, final. She folded clothes the way someone folds a life they are done trying to fix. She left in the morning. Not at dawn, when the world still pretends nothing has begun. But in that fragile space between night and day, when the sky is pale and unsure of itself, and the streets of the neighborhood are only just beginning to breathe. Before anyone woke up, the house was still. The fan hummed softly. Somewhere down the road, a motorcycle coughed to life, then disappeared. Mama Efunanya moved through the rooms with the ease of someone who had memorized every corner, every uneven tile, every place where the floor might creak if stepped on too hard. She carried her small bag in one hand. It wasn't heavy. Her life had already been lightened. She paused once near the doorway, not to look back, but to steady herself. Leaving did not frighten her. Staying had. Leaving only required one thing. She had finally found clarity. Before another word could be said, there would be no last-minute explanations, no sudden understanding, no conversation spoken too late to change anything. She knew better than to wait for words that only arrived when damage was already done. She stepped outside quietly. The morning air was cool against her skin, carrying the familiar smells of the city dust, fuel, faint traces of frying oil beginning somewhere nearby. Lagos was waking up, indifferent and alive, filled with people who did not know her story and did not need to. She didn't slam the door. There was no anger left in her to release that way. Anger requires energy. And Mama Efunanya had spent hers carefully, over many years, in ways no one ever noticed. She didn't leave a note. Notes are for unfinished thoughts. For things you still hope will be understood later. She had already spoken the only sentence that mattered, the one asked softly on the kitchen floor. Everything after that had been answered without words. She adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder and began to walk. Each step felt deliberate, measured, like a woman moving forward not in haste, but in acceptance. She did not rush toward a destination. She simply walked away from a place where she had learned that silence could wound as deeply as cruelty. Behind her, the house remained quiet. Inside, nothing yet reflected her absence. The floor would still be clean. The kitchen still orderly. It would take time before anyone noticed what was missing. Mama Efunanya did not look back to see if anyone would stop her. She already knew they wouldn't. She had already said everything that mattered. That evening, the house felt different. Not louder. Not messier. Just unfamiliar. The air carried a strange stillness, the kind that makes you pause without knowing why. He stood in the doorway for a moment longer than usual, listening. There was no sound of movement from the kitchen, no faint clink of dishes, no soft hum drifting through the house, the tune his mother used to carry with her without realizing it. The kitchen was clean, but empty. Every surface wiped. Every plate in its place. Nothing out of order. And yet, something essential was missing. He stepped inside slowly. The floor was spotless, but for the first time, no one was kneeling there, carefully wiping away marks no one else ever noticed. The room felt wider, colder, like a space that had lost its purpose the moment it lost its witness. No footsteps followed him. No gentle clearing of the throat behind him. No presence hovering quietly at the edge of the room, waiting to be useful. He opened the cupboard. Everything was there. Too perfectly there. That was when it reached him, not like a shock, but like a weight settling into his chest. She was gone. Not stepped out. Not resting. Gone. He moved through the house room by room, calling her name only once softly, almost experimentally, as if unsure whether he wanted an answer. The sound of his own voice felt intrusive, out of place in the silence she had left behind. He remembered the kitchen floor, her hands shaking. Her voice barely a whisper. Just, look at me once. He had looked away. Now there was nothing left to look at. The realization came too late, as it always does. Silence had never been neutral. It had never been harmless. It had been a decision he made again and again, convincing himself that staying quiet was the same as staying kind. It wasn't. Silence hadn't protected anyone. It hadn't kept the peace. It had simply created a space where pain could exist without interruption. He stood alone in the kitchen, surrounded by the order she had maintained for so long, and understood the truth he had avoided. Silence didn't keep the peace. It just made sure no one stopped the pain when it mattered most. He watched her cry. Not from a distance, not through a door, but from only a few steps away, close enough to reach out, close enough to stop it. He stood right there, close enough to hear the uneven catch in her breath, close enough to see the tears trace familiar lines down her face, the same face that had watched over him through fevers, hunger, and nights when the rain battered tin roofs and fear crept into every corner of their lives. And he said nothing. At the time, it felt like hesitation, like confusion, like a moment that could be revisited later, repaired with explanation. He told himself silence was temporary, that there would be another chance, another conversation, another moment when words would come more easily. He did not understand that some moments do not wait. In that quiet kitchen, with the city of Lagos breathing just beyond the walls, something irreversible had taken place. His silence did not pass unnoticed. It settled. It hardened. It became the answer he never meant to give. Mama Ifunanya did not ask for rescue. She did not ask for loyalty over love. She did not ask him to raise his voice or choose sides. She asked for the smallest thing a human being can ask for: recognition, and he looked away. Later, when the house grew empty and the order she maintained became a reminder rather than a comfort, he would replay that moment again and again. He would remember where he stood, where she sat. How easy it would have been to say her name. But memory does not grant second chances. It only sharpens regret. That silence, the one he believed would protect everyone, did not fade. It followed him. It echoed through rooms that no longer carried her presence. It became the cost of a decision he never thought he was making. And that silence cost him the one person who only wanted to be seen.